Husband tricked me into signing over my house. He never saw my revenge coming. I never thought the man I loved would try to steal everything from me. But there I was, staring at the contract that would sign away my house, the house I bought before we were even married. And the worst part? He wasn't just planning to take my home. He was already setting up his new life with another woman. But he had no idea I was one step ahead. Want to know how I turned his perfect scheme against him? How I destroyed his plan before he could ruin my life? Keep watching, because trust me, you won't believe how this ends. I never imagined that the man I loved would one day become a stranger sitting across from me, pushing legal documents my way, as if he were just closing a business deal. Yet there I was, standing in my own kitchen, my hands trembling, as I stared down at the neatly stacked papers on the counter. "It's just for tax purposes, Marissa," Brandon said, his voice soft, his blue eyes filled with that same manufactured sincerity that had once made me believe every word out of his mouth. He reached out, touching my hand lightly, but something about his touch felt different, detached, calculated. Maybe it was the way his fingers didn't quite wrap around mine like they used to, or maybe it was the slight tremor in his voice that sent a warning chill down my spine. I should have trusted my gut. The house had been my sanctuary long before Brandon was in the picture. A beautiful Spanish-style villa in La Jolla, perched on a quiet street just minutes from the ocean, with large arched windows that flooded the living room with golden California sunlight. I had bought it when I was 30, after years of grueling shifts and careful saving during my residency. Every inch of it had been designed with purpose: the sun-drenched terrace where I sipped my morning coffee, the backyard where my 3-year-old daughter, Lily, played with her bubble wand, the cozy reading nook by the fireplace where I curled up after long nights at the hospital. This house wasn't just an asset, it was my home, my safe place, the one thing I knew was mine, and now my husband wanted me to sign it over to him. "If you really cared about our family, you'd understand why this makes sense," Brandon continued, sliding the papers closer. His tone was patient, reasonable, like he was explaining something simple to a child. "Between your crazy hospital hours and your exhaustion, I'm the one holding this family together." His words stung. He wasn't wrong about my schedule. Being a pediatric surgeon meant long, unpredictable hours, and I'd missed more bedtime stories than I cared to admit. But his argument wasn't about the house being in better hands. It was about control. I glanced at the baby monitor on the counter, the soft sounds of Lily breathing through the speaker grounding me for a moment. She was the spitting image of me, same dark curls, same olive skin. She was also the reason I worked so hard. Every shift, every late night, every surgery, it was all to ensure she'd have every opportunity in life. Brandon never understood that. "I don't know, Brandon," I said finally, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "This house. It's my security. I bought it before we were married." Something flickered across his face: frustration, maybe even anger, but it disappeared just as quickly as it came, replaced with the same practiced concern. "Of course, babe. I get that," he said, forcing a small smile. "I just think we should be making decisions as a team." A team? Right. That night, long after Brandon had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at those damn papers. My instincts screamed at me not to sign. But why? What was he really up to? My mind flashed back to the past few months, Brandon working late more often, glued to his phone, suddenly interested in going to the gym again. At first, I had brushed it off. Stress, maybe. A midlife crisis. But now, with the house transfer looming over me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, as I rushed around the kitchen packing Lily's daycare bag, Brandon leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone. "I dropped your car off for an oil change," he said casually, barely looking up. I froze mid-bite into my toast. That was new. He'd never done something like that before. "Oh, thanks," I said, forcing a smile. "Anything for you," he murmured, but his eyes stayed locked on his phone. I watched him carefully as I strapped Lily into her car seat. There was something different in the way he moved, a lightness to his step, a newfound energy. It wasn't just the gym, it was something else. A secret he thought I was too busy or too trusting to notice. At the hospital, between surgeries, I ducked into an empty exam room and called Tanya, my best friend and one of the sharpest real estate attorneys I knew. "Something feels off," I whispered, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Brandon's pushing hard for this house transfer. He says it's for tax purposes." Tanya went silent for a moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was laced with something that made my stomach drop. "Marissa, don't sign anything." A cold wave of dread washed over me. "Why?" "Because transferring the house into his name alone doesn't give you any tax benefits," she said carefully. "If anything, it makes things messier, especially since you bought it before the marriage. I don't want to alarm you, but I've seen this before. Men don't push for property transfers unless they're planning something." My blood ran cold. That afternoon, during a quick break, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I checked our phone records. My hands shook as I scrolled through months of call logs, my stomach churning as I saw the same number pop up again and again. I hesitated before typing it into a reverse lookup. A name appeared: Sierra Monroe. A quick social media search confirmed my worst fear. A stunning blonde in her late 20s, all sun-kissed skin and perfect teeth, posting pictures of beachfront properties with captions like "New beginnings ahead." My heart pounded in my chest. Was she talking about my house? That night, I didn't confront Brandon. Not yet. Instead, I sat beside Lily's crib, watching her sleep, my fingers gripping the phone as I stared at Sierra's smiling face. I had no solid proof. Not yet. But I was a surgeon. I knew how to be patient. If Brandon thought I was just going to sign away my house and walk blindly into whatever trap he was setting, he was about to find out just how wrong he was. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The moment I saw Sierra Monroe's name on Brandon's call history, everything inside me screamed that I needed to act fast. But how? I didn't have concrete proof, just a gut feeling, a real estate agent's Instagram post, and a growing sense of dread clawing at my insides. I knew Brandon. I knew how careful he was. He wasn't sloppy enough to leave evidence lying around for me to find. If he was planning something, he had already thought it through, which meant I had to be smarter. That night, I lay in bed beside him, my body still, my mind racing. His breathing was slow, steady, like a man without a care in the world. How long had he been playing me? How long had I been sleeping next to someone who was plotting behind my back? I turned onto my side, staring at the faint outline of his face in the darkness. He looked peaceful, relaxed, a man who believed he had everything under control. It made my skin crawl. The next morning, as I was getting Lily ready for daycare, I decided to test him. "Hey," I said casually, stuffing an extra change of clothes into her bag. "I was thinking about the house transfer. Maybe we should talk to a financial advisor first, just to make sure it's really the right move." Brandon barely looked up from his phone. "Babe, we don't need a financial advisor." For the briefest moment, his jaw tightened. It was subtle, but I saw it. And then, just as quickly, he forced a smile. "Sure, if it'll make you feel better." It was a lie. That only confirmed it for me. This wasn't about taxes. This wasn't about making things easier. He was up to something. By the time I got to the hospital, my hands were shaking. I scrubbed in for surgery, focusing on the procedure in front of me, but even with a scalpel in my hand, my mind kept flashing back to that damn contract sitting on my kitchen counter. When my shift finally ended, I locked myself in an empty office and called Tanya again. "I need to know everything," I whispered, keeping my voice low. "If he decides to sell, refinance, or even rent it out, you wouldn't have a say." "Marissa, are you seriously considering this?" "No," I said quickly. I needed to hear it out loud. Silence. "Then you think he's planning something, don't you?" I swallowed hard. "I think he's already planned it." Tanya sighed. You need to be careful. Men don't push for property transfers unless they have an exit strategy. If he's trying to get your house in his name, he's probably looking at divorce. Divorce. The word hit me harder than I expected. Was that what this was? Was Brandon trying to set himself up to walk away clean, with my house in his back pocket? I ended the call, my pulse pounding. If that was true, then it meant Sierra Monroe wasn't just some woman he was seeing on the side. She was part of the plan, and I needed to know just how deep this went. I started digging. At first, I kept it small, checking Brandon's emails when he left his laptop unattended, skimming his text messages when he was in the shower. He was careful, more careful than I had expected, but he wasn't perfect. There were little things. A dinner reservation for two at a high-end steakhouse on a night he'd told me he was working late. An Uber ride history that didn't match the places he said he was going. A text from an unknown number reading, "Miss you. Can't wait." Then I got bold. I started tracking his location. It wasn't difficult. His phone was connected to our shared Apple account, something he had probably forgotten about. I checked it once, telling myself it was just to ease my mind. But what I found only made it worse. He wasn't at the gym after work. He wasn't at his office either. He was in Del Mar, at a beachfront condominium complex, the same one Sierra Monroe had tagged in her latest Instagram post. My stomach twisted into knots. I felt sick. Brandon wasn't just planning to take my house. He was already setting up his next life without me. That night, when he came home, I pretended everything was normal. I made dinner, put Lily to bed, laughed at his stupid jokes. And when he finally went upstairs to shower, I sat at the kitchen table and forced myself to breathe. I had enough now to know I wasn't imagining things. But I needed more. I needed something concrete. Because when the time came to confront him, I wasn't going to give him a chance to lie his way out of it. I needed a smoking gun, and I was going to get it. As soon as Brandon went to bed, I grabbed my keys and drove across town to a small electronics store Tanya had recommended. The man behind the counter barely blinked when I asked for a discreet recording device. "You looking for something voice-activated?" he asked, pulling out a tiny black recorder no bigger than a USB stick. "Yes," I said, my hands steady for the first time all day. "Put it somewhere central," he advised. "A kitchen's usually best. That's where people talk without thinking." I nodded. The next morning, while Brandon was in the shower, I hid the recorder under a decorative bowl on the kitchen counter, right next to the spot where he'd slid those damn papers toward me. Then I waited. Waited for him to slip up. Waited for him to say something he couldn't take back. Because if Brandon thought he could take my house, my money, my life, and waltz into his new one, without consequences, he was about to find out just how wrong he was. I had the proof. The texts, the secret real estate deal, the outrageous lies he had been feeding me for months. But now, I had a choice. Should I confront him immediately, or wait until he thought he had won? What would you do? Drop a 1 in the comments if you'd call him out right away, or a 2 if you'd play the long game and let him dig his own grave. Because trust me, what I did next, it was brutal. I woke up before sunrise, the weight of what I had discovered pressing down on my chest like a brick. My husband, the man I had trusted, built a life with, shared a child with, was planning to steal everything from me. The proof wasn't ironclad yet, but I could feel it in my bones. The hidden recorder in the kitchen was my best chance at catching him in the act, but I needed to be patient. I had learned a long time ago, both in medicine and in life, that people will always show their true colors if you give them enough time. I moved through the morning routine like nothing was wrong, packing Lily's daycare bag while Brandon scrolled through his phone at the counter, sipping his black coffee like it was any other day. But I saw him differently now. Every little thing he did irritated me in ways it hadn't before. The way he barely looked up when I spoke. The way he sighed dramatically when I asked him to help with Lily's shoes. The way his eyes darted toward his phone every time it buzzed. Was it Sierra? Was she waiting for an update? I kept my voice light. "Hey, I've been thinking about the house stuff. Maybe you're right. Maybe we should just get it done." Brandon froze for half a second before turning to me with a slow, satisfied smile. Really? I shrugged. Yeah. I mean, I trust you. So if you say it's the right move for our family, then okay. I had never seen him so smug. He reached for his phone immediately, tapping out a message before slipping it into his pocket. My stomach twisted at how quickly he was letting his guard down. He thought he had won. I kissed Lily goodbye, watched Brandon pull out of the driveway, and the second he was gone, I tore through the house, looking for anything I had missed. I went through his desk drawers, his nightstand, his briefcase, nothing. He was being careful, but no one is perfect. By the time I got to his car, my hands were shaking. I didn't even know what I was hoping to find. A receipt? A contract? Anything that could give me an edge. The glove compartment was locked. That was odd. I had never seen him lock it before. My pulse kicked up as I went back inside and grabbed a spare key from our kitchen drawer. It clicked open easily, and inside, buried under a pile of insurance papers, was a thin manila folder with Sierra Monroe's name on it. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands clammy as I pulled the papers out. The first document made my breath catch in my throat. It was a rental application for a high-end condo in Del Mar. The same luxury complex I had seen on her Instagram. The move-in date, 2 weeks from now. I flipped to the next page. A contract for a real estate agency listing. My stomach dropped. It was for our house. He was already making moves to put it on the market. I clutched the folder in my hands, staring at the proof of his betrayal, of his arrogance, of his absolute certainty that I was dumb enough to sign away my home without a second thought. My vision blurred with rage. I had spent years breaking my back for this life. I had sacrificed sleep, missed holidays, poured every ounce of energy into my work so that Lily could grow up with security. And he thought he could just take it? Toss me aside like an afterthought and slide into a new life with some 20-something real estate agent? I shoved the papers back where I found them, locking the glove compartment and sprinting back inside. I grabbed my phone, hands still shaking, and called Tanya. You were right, I whispered. I found rental paperwork. He's already planning to move out. And Tanya, he's listing the house. My house. I could hear her exhale sharply. Jesus, Marissa. He's really going through with it. What do I do? I clenched my jaw, my pulse pounding. I don't have enough yet. He could still lie his way out of this, but I need to stop him before he gets the upper hand. Okay, she said, her voice steadier than mine. You need to start separating your finances. Move your direct deposit to an account in your name only. Make copies of everything: mortgage statements, bank records, texts, if you can get them. And whatever you do, don't sign anything. I nodded even though she couldn't see me, my mind already racing ahead. I needed to be strategic. If Brandon thought I was still falling for his act, he wouldn't rush. And if he didn't rush, I still had time. I spent the rest of the day collecting documents, making copies, scanning everything onto a flash drive that I locked in my office desk at the hospital. Every spare moment I had between surgeries, I was planning, calculating, preparing. By the time I walked through the door that evening, I felt different. Lighter, in a way. Like I wasn't just a woman waiting for the inevitable betrayal. I was a woman about to flip the script. Brandon was already in the kitchen when I got home, pouring himself a drink. Hey, babe, he greeted, too casually. Long day? I dropped my bag by the door, forcing a small smile. Yeah, you? Busy, he said. Lots of calls. You know how it is. Yeah, I knew exactly how it was. I moved to the counter where the recorder was hidden, leaning against it as I unwrapped a protein bar, keeping my tone relaxed. So, I was thinking, maybe we should do a little getaway before we finalize everything with the house. Just you, me, and Lily. Brandon blinked. Oh? I shrugged. Yeah. I mean, once it's done, we'll be busy with the paperwork and all that. Just a little family trip, you know? His hesitation was brief, but I caught it. Yeah, sure, we can talk about it. He was lying. He wasn't planning to be in this family long enough for a trip. But that was fine. Let him think he still had me wrapped around his finger. Let him believe I was blindly walking into his trap, because in reality he was walking into mine. I had always believed that the scariest part of betrayal was the moment you discovered it, the gut-wrenching realization that someone you loved had been lying to you. But I was wrong. The hardest part wasn't the discovery, it was pretending you didn't know. It was waking up every morning next to a man who had already decided to throw me away like I was nothing, smiling through conversations when every word that left his mouth was a carefully constructed lie. It was acting like everything was fine while I quietly built my case against him, knowing that every second I stayed in this game was another second I had to keep my rage buried deep enough that he wouldn't suspect a thing. The days that followed my meeting with Elliot Harper were a test of endurance. I was playing a part now, a role I had to perfect if I wanted to take Brandon down the way he deserved. I still cooked dinner, still laughed at his jokes, still let him kiss me goodbye in the mornings like a doting wife. And every time I felt the anger bubble too close to the surface, I reminded myself that this wasn't about my emotions anymore, this was about strategy. If I wanted to win, I had to outthink him. I had one advantage: Brandon underestimated me. He thought I was just another busy wife too distracted with work and motherhood to pay attention to the details. That was his first mistake. The second? He thought he was the smartest person in the room. That weekend, he suggested we go out to dinner. A nice date night, he said, smiling at me like he hadn't been plotting behind my back for months. We haven't had one in a while. I forced myself to play along, feigning hesitation before nodding. Yeah, okay. That sounds nice. We went to Lorenzo's, the same Italian restaurant where he had proposed to me years ago. It was an intentional choice. I knew it. He was trying to lull me into a false sense of security, make me believe he was still the same man who had once promised me forever. But I saw through it now. I watched him across the candlelit table, noting the way he kept checking his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. Sierra. I could almost hear her in my head, texting him between courses. Did she sign yet? When can we celebrate? I sipped my wine, keeping my expression soft. Brandon. I've been thinking about the house transfer. His eyes snapped up to mine, his body tensing for just a second, before he quickly masked it with a smile. Yeah? What about it? I exhaled slowly, as if I was struggling with the decision. I know I've been hesitant, but maybe you're right. Maybe it's the best thing for our family. The relief that washed over his face was instant. He reached for my hand across the table, squeezing it just a little too tightly. Babe, I promise you this is what's best. I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't think so. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. Okay, let's do it. His grip tightened, his excitement barely contained. Really? I nodded. Yeah. If it makes things easier for us, then I trust you. It was a gamble. I was giving him exactly what he wanted, or at least making him think I was. I needed him to believe that I was still blind, still too naive to see the knife he was holding behind his back, because the moment he thought he had won, that's when he'd slip up. And he did. That night after we got home and he had fallen asleep, I checked his phone again. I knew I was playing with fire, but I had to see. The messages were there, just like I expected. She's signing tomorrow, it's done. Finally, Sierra had replied. I can't wait to start our new life, baby. I stared at the words on the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had given him an inch, and he had immediately taken a mile. He was so sure of himself, so sure of me. I slipped his phone back onto the nightstand, climbed into bed beside him, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow. That was when he thought it would all be over. Tomorrow. He was going to hand me those papers with that same confident smile, watch me sign away my own house, and walk away believing that he had outsmarted me. He had no idea. He had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up before Brandon, slipping out of bed as quietly as I could. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him sleep. He looked peaceful, completely unaware that his perfect little plan was about to implode. I wanted to laugh. He thought today was the day he'd win. He thought I was going to sit across from him, sign those papers, and hand over everything I had built before he waltzed off into the sunset with Sierra Monroe. I let myself enjoy the moment, the calm before the storm, then turned and walked down the hallway to Lily's room. She was still asleep, curled up with her stuffed bunny, her little face relaxed and safe. My chest tightened. This was what I was fighting for. Not the house, not the money, her stability, her future. Brandon had no idea who he was up against. I went through the motions of the morning routine like nothing was wrong. I made Lily's breakfast, packed her daycare bag, kissed her goodbye before heading back inside, where Brandon was waiting for me in the kitchen. "You ready?" he asked, already dressed, a folder tucked under his arm. The papers, the ones that would supposedly make everything easier. I forced a small smile, playing the part. "Yeah, let's get it done," he grinned, placing a hand on my lower back as he led me out the door. I could feel the excitement radiating off him. He really thought he had me. We drove in near silence, the hum of the tires against the pavement, the only sound between us. My heart was pounding, but I kept my breathing steady, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I had to play this just right. I couldn't let him suspect anything. We pulled up to the notary's office, a small building nestled between a law firm and a coffee shop. Brandon parked the car and turned to me, his expression soft, almost affectionate. "This is the best thing for us, babe," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. I almost recoiled, but I forced myself to nod. "I know." He let out a breath, like he was relieved, then stepped out of the car. I followed him inside, my stomach twisting with anticipation. The receptionist greeted us with a polite smile, leading us to a small conference room where a notary was already seated at the table. Brandon wasted no time, pulling out the papers and placing them in front of me. "Just sign here," he said, tapping the line at the bottom of the page. His voice was smooth, casual, like he was asking me to sign a birthday card instead of handing over my house. I picked up the pen, staring at the documents in front of me. I could feel his eyes on me, watching closely, waiting for me to do what he needed. I let my hand hover over the paper, letting the silence stretch just long enough for him to get nervous. Then I set the pen down. "Actually," I said, meeting his gaze. "Before I sign, let's talk about Sierra." Brandon froze. The notary shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the sudden tension in the room. Brandon forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "What are you talking about?" I tilted my head, keeping my voice calm. "Sierra Monroe, the woman you've been texting for months. The one you're planning to move in with once I sign these papers." His face drained of color so fast I thought he might pass out. He opened his mouth, then closed it, scrambling for an explanation. I don't know what. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the screenshots I had saved, the texts, the call logs, the rental application for the condo in Del Mar. One turned the screen toward him. "Wanna try that again?" He swallowed hard, his hands clenching into fists. "Marissa, this isn't what you think." I cut him off. "Oh, it's exactly what I think. You've been planning this for months. You were never going to tell me. You were just waiting for me to sign so you could take my house, sell it, and run off with her." The notary cleared her throat. Would you like some privacy?" Brandon shot her a sharp glare before turning back to me, lowering his voice. "Marissa, you're overreacting. This is just a misunderstanding." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "Really? Then why did you text her last night saying, 'She's signing tomorrow'? It's done?" His mouth opened, then shut. He had no answer. I could see the panic setting in now. He was realizing just how badly he had miscalculated. He had expected me to be blind, to be trusting, to hand him everything without question. He had never considered the possibility that I was one step ahead of him. I stood up, sliding the unsigned papers back across the table. "You want my house, Brandon? Sue me for it." His jaw clenched. "You're making a huge mistake." I smiled. No, you did. And with that, I walked out, leaving him sitting there, stunned, his perfect plan crumbling around him. I walked out of that notary's office with my head high, but inside, my heart was pounding. I had done it, I had flipped the script, thrown Brandon completely off balance. But this wasn't over. Not even close. I had just set fire to his perfect little plan, and now I needed to be ready for whatever came next. I got into my car and gripped the steering wheel, exhaling slowly. My hands were shaking. The adrenaline was still coursing through me, my mind racing. I had spent weeks pretending, playing along, waiting for the right moment. Now that it had come, now that I had watched the blood drain from Brandon's face as I dismantled his lies in front of a witness, I should have felt victorious. But instead, I felt something else: anticipation. Because men like Brandon don't go down quietly. I knew him too well. He was arrogant, manipulative, entitled. He wasn't going to slink away and lick his wounds just because I had called him out. No, he was going to lash out. He was going to try to regain control, and I had to be ready. By the time I got home, I had already made my next move. I called Tanya the second I walked through the door. "It's done," I said, pacing the living room. I confronted him at the notary's office. "He knows I know." She let out a slow whistle. "Damn. How did he react?" "He tried to deny it at first," I said. "Then, when I showed him the messages, he panicked. He didn't see it coming." "That's good," she said, but there was a hesitation in her voice. "But you know what happens now, right?" I closed my eyes, already knowing the answer. "He's going to fight back. Hard," she confirmed. "You need to protect yourself, Marissa. Make sure your finances are locked down. Change your locks. Get security cameras. He's not just going to let this go." I swallowed, forcing myself to stay calm. I know. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for every little sound. Brandon hadn't come home yet, and I had no idea where he was. With every passing hour, the silence felt heavier, like the calm before a storm. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. I reached for it, my breath catching in my throat. It was him, Brandon. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. A minute later, another message. "You're being ridiculous. Let's be adults about this." I clenched my jaw. Adults? This coming from the man who had spent months plotting to steal from me? Who had been lying to my face, while secretly planning a future with another woman? I set the phone down without replying. But then another text came in. "Think about Lily." I stared at the words on the screen, a slow, burning rage building inside me. He was trying to manipulate me, trying to make me feel guilty, to make me doubt myself. He wanted me to believe that I was somehow the one being irrational. I took a deep breath, forced my hands to stop shaking, and blocked his number. The next morning, I woke up to a banging on my front door. I shot up from bed, my heart hammering in my chest. The sun was barely up, and for a moment, I thought I had imagined it. But then, bang, bang, bang. I threw on a robe and hurried down the stairs, peeking through the peephole. Brandon. He looked disheveled, like he hadn't slept. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. I hesitated, then unlocked the door but didn't open it all the way. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sharp. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Seriously, Marissa? You won't even let me in my own house?" I gritted my teeth. "It's not your house. And after what you tried to pull, you're lucky I'm even talking to you." His face darkened. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Am I?" I shot back. "You were trying to steal my house, Brandon. You lied to me. You were planning to sell it and move in with her." His jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it this time. Instead, he shifted tactics. "Look, I know I messed up, okay? But we don't have to do this like enemies. We can work something out." I narrowed my eyes. "Like what?" He exhaled through his nose, trying to appear calm, but I could see the tension in his body. "We can split things fairly. You don't have to make this ugly." I almost laughed. Ugly? He had been setting me up for months, And now he wanted to act like we were negotiating? I crossed my arms. Oh, it's already ugly, Brandon. And the only reason it's not worse for you yet is because I haven't taken this to court yet. His nostrils flared, his mask of calm slipping. You really want to do this? I met his gaze, my voice steady. I'm not the one who started it. We stared at each other for a long moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed off. I closed the door, locking it behind me. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from rage. He thought this was negotiable. He thought I would still be willing to work with him after everything he had done. He still had no idea, but he would. I barely had time to process what had just happened before my phone buzzed again. I knew it was him before I even looked. I had blocked his number the night before, but Brandon was persistent. He was using another one now. Probably Sierra's, or maybe even a burner. He wasn't going to let this go. I took a deep breath, ignored the call, and moved to the window. His car was gone, but I knew he wasn't done. He was angry now. The first phase of his plan had crumbled, and instead of owning up to it, he was doing what men like him always do, grasping for control. I had already taken steps to protect myself. The day before, I had called a locksmith and changed every single lock on the house. I had installed a security system, one with cameras facing both the front and back of the property. I wasn't stupid. Brandon had lost his power over me, and I wasn't going to give him another opening. But deep down, I knew that wasn't enough. Brandon wasn't going to walk away quietly. I spent the rest of the day on edge, waiting for the next move. I took Lily to daycare, went to work, tried to focus during my surgeries, but my mind was elsewhere. My instincts told me that something was coming, that this wasn't over, and I was right. That night, as I was putting Lily to bed, I heard a noise outside. It wasn't loud, just a faint rustling near the driveway. If I hadn't been listening for something, I might have missed it. My body tensed. I gently tucked Lily's blanket around her and kissed her forehead before stepping out of her room. My heart beat suddenly too loud in my ears. I moved slowly, carefully, keeping my footsteps light as I approached the front door. I peered through the peephole, my stomach tightening. Nothing, but then a shadow. It shifted near the side of the house, just beyond the porch light's reach. I grabbed my phone and opened the security camera app. My breath caught in my throat. Brandon. He was standing by the side gate, his head lowered, trying the lock. I clenched my jaw. He was testing me. I could see it in the way he moved, the cautious but deliberate way he checked the latch, like he was seeing just how much access he still had. He wasn't kicking down my door. Not yet. No, this was something else. This was a warning. I hit the intercom button on the security system, my voice sharp and steady. Step away from my house, Brandon. His head snapped up, his body going still. He turned toward the camera, and even through the grainy night vision, I could see the surprise on his face. He hadn't expected me to see him. He recovered quickly, though, stepping closer to the camera, his hands raised in mock innocence. Marissa, come on. I just want to talk. Then call your lawyer, I said coldly, because we have nothing else to discuss. His jaw tightened. You're seriously doing this? You brought this on yourself. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You're being ridiculous. I just came to get some of my stuff. Your stuff is in storage, I shot back. The key was sent to your email. Don't come back here again. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Jesus, Marissa. I don't know why you're acting like this. Acting? I nearly laughed. He was standing outside my house in the middle of the night, trying to find a way inside, and he wanted to act like I was the unreasonable one? I let the silence stretch. Finally, his mask slipped just a little. His voice dropped lower, colder. You really want to make me the bad guy here? I folded my arms. No need. You did that all by yourself. For a moment, I thought he might lose it right then and there. His shoulders tensed, his hands curled into fists. But then he stepped back, lifting his chin like he had the upper hand. "This isn't over," he said. Then he turned and walked back to his car. I didn't move until I saw his taillights disappear down the street. Then, finally, I let out a slow breath. He was right about one thing. This wasn't over, but he had no idea just how badly he was about to lose. I watched Brandon's taillights disappear down the street, but I didn't move. My hands were still clenched into fists at my sides, my body rigid, every muscle locked in place. I had been prepared for him to lash out, but seeing him lurking outside my home, testing the locks like a damn burglar, was something else entirely. He had finally dropped the last shred of pretense. He wasn't playing the charming, rational husband anymore. He had shown me exactly who he was, a man who refused to accept that he had lost. I exhaled slowly, forcing my fingers to relax. My hands were ice cold, my skin prickling with the adrenaline still running through me. I turned away from the door, walking to the kitchen where my laptop sat open on the counter. I pulled up my email and opened the folder labeled Elliot Harper Legal Proceedings. It was all there, the case against Brandon, neatly compiled and backed by solid evidence. Screenshots of his texts with Sierra, proof of the real estate listing he had started without my knowledge, bank statements showing his financial deception. And now, thanks to tonight, security footage of him trespassing. It was time. The next morning, I dropped Lily off at daycare and drove straight to Elliot's office. He was waiting for me, a calm, knowing expression on his face as I walked in. "I take it last night didn't go well?" he asked, gesturing for me to sit. I let out a dry laugh as I sank into the chair across from his desk. "You could say that." He showed up at my house after midnight, tried the gate, told me, "This isn't over." Elliot's expression darkened. That's exactly the kind of behavior we needed him to show. "Did you get it on camera?" I nodded. "Every second of it." "Good." He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Because that, Marissa, is the final nail in his coffin." I swallowed, a strange mixture of relief and tension twisting in my chest. I had spent weeks preparing for this, gathering everything I needed, setting the trap. And now it was all in place. "What's next?" "We file today," Elliot said simply. "Restraining order first. Full divorce proceedings immediately after. And based on the evidence we have, we're going after everything your house. Sole custody of Lily, and financial restitution for his attempted fraud." The words settled over me, heavy and real. This was it. I sat there for a moment, staring at the neatly stacked papers on his desk. Divorce. The end of my marriage? Not just in my heart, not just in my mind, but legally, officially. I had spent years building a life with Brandon, and now I was dismantling it piece by piece. And yet, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel like I was suffocating under the weight of his lies. I felt free. I picked up the pen, pressed it to the paper, and signed my name. By the time I walked out of Elliot's office, Brandon had already received the restraining order. I knew because my phone exploded with messages from unknown numbers. He was spiraling, his texts bouncing between outrage and desperation. "You can't do this to me. Marissa, be reasonable. This is our house. You can't just take it. You're ruining my life." I blocked the numbers without responding. 3 days later, he tried to fight the restraining order in court. He lost. The judge took one look at the security footage of him trespassing and shot him down so fast his head spun. The order was upheld indefinitely, meaning he was legally barred from coming near me, our home, or Lily. If he so much as set foot on my property again, he'd be arrested on the spot. That was when his life truly began to fall apart. First, he lost his job. Turns out, when you're caught attempting to commit fraud, your company doesn't really want to keep you around. His employer found out about the lawsuit and fired him within the week. Then Sierra dumped him. Oh, that was my favorite part. I didn't even have to lift a finger. She left all on her own the second she realized he was jobless, homeless, and drowning in legal trouble. I knew because one of her final texts to him showed up in our court documents. I didn't sign up for this. You told me we'd have a fresh start. But you're just a mess. I'm done." The irony was delicious. The woman he had betrayed his family for, the one he had schemed and stolen for, walked away without so much as a backward glance, the moment he wasn't useful to her anymore. And that was exactly what he deserved. When the divorce was finalized, the judge granted me sole custody of Lily. Brandon was allowed supervised visitation twice a month, but after a while, even that stopped. I think the reality of his new life was too much for him to bear, his lack of control, his total downfall. He disappeared to some other city, trying to outrun the wreckage he had created. And me? I moved on. My career thrived without his constant belittling, his passive-aggressive remarks about how I worked too much or how I cared more about my job than my family. I was promoted to chief of pediatric surgery, something Brandon had once mocked me for wanting. Lily flourished. She was happy, growing up in a home filled with love and stability, not manipulation and deceit. And the house was still mine. I renovated it, changed every inch that reminded me of him. I planted a garden in the backyard where Lily played every evening. I repainted the walls, reclaimed every space that had once been tainted by his lies. Every mortgage payment I made felt like a victory, a reminder that I had protected what was mine. One day, months later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Brandon. It was pathetic, really. A long-winded apology, a plea for sympathy, a desperate attempt to rewrite history. He talked about regret, about mistakes, about how he had lost everything that mattered. I didn't even finish reading it. I tossed it into the fireplace and watched the flames consume it. Because some bridges, they aren't meant to be rebuilt. And I had already walked away. And just like that, his perfect little life fell apart. He lost the house. He lost me. He lost everything. And the woman he betrayed me for? She walked away too the second she realized he had nothing left. So here's the lesson: protect yourself. No matter how much you love someone, never give them the power to destroy you. If something feels off, trust your gut, gather your evidence, and fight back. Now tell me, have you ever caught someone in a lie that big? Let me know in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one. Trust is a gift, not a guarantee. I learned the hard way that no matter how much you love someone, you must protect yourself legally, financially, and emotionally. If something feels off, pay attention. Never sign anything without understanding it. Keep your assets separate. Document everything. And most importantly, never let anyone make you feel guilty for standing up for yourself. In the end, I didn't just fight for my house. I fought for my future, my child, and my peace. And that was worth more than anything.